The Bear has been one of the best TV series of 2020s and remains my personal favorite overall, but after the polarizing third season, the show seemed to lose its direction, with disjointed narratives and overly long scenes that prioritize style over substance. That said, even in season 3, I found myself genuinely enjoying a few episodes and could still feel the creator's passion. So when season 4 arrived, I really hoped that it would be the course correction the series desperately needed, and at first it really felt like it might be.
This clock is displaying 1,440 hours. When that clock shows 0, this restaurant needs to cease operations.
We had a clear urgent goal, something the previous season lacked, and it even felt like the show understood what was at stake.
Unless there's a marked difference, like a giant fucking difference. Like, holy shit, that changes everything. Clock runs out. You closed a month ago.
But as the season progressed, that urgency began to fade. The ticking clock, which was supposed to be a powerful driving force, quickly became more of a background detail. Instead of tightening the story around the clear goal, the narrative once again started to drift. Unrelated subplots grew even bigger than before, and the momentum that seemed so promising at the start just wasn't there. So it really felt like this line unintentionally sums up the entirety of the season.
We can keep going.
Why would you keep going?
And that's a really important question. Sure, the acting is still superb, the show looks incredible, and every now and then we do get a really moving scene.
Well, Mikey and I became pretty good friends.
When?
When you weren't around.
But honestly, I can't say I liked a single episode this season. For all the emphasis on every second counts, most of what we see feels like a bland repeat of the ideas we've already explored. The whole point of Everstuff and Luca originally was to unlock Richie and Marcus's personal growth, to push them forward, to show what it means to master their craft. Bringing them back now doesn't just diminish the arcs those characters already went through. It's a straight up cheat code. Like, they clearly cannot afford the best stuff from the best restaurant in Chicago, plus a top tier chef like Luca. It doesn't make sense financially or narratively.
No, he's on a stage.
Stash. Wonderful.
And then there is all the new subplots that go absolutely nowhere. What was the point of the sommelier training? What's up with Marcus's dad? Why introduce the alleged Michelin critic if that never goes anywhere? Why Francine Fag? And even the one thing that seemed promising, Ibra and the possible expansion of the original beef, is left hanging.
You should hear this.
No!
Get out of the fucking car.
Suck my balls!
If you get out of the car.
No! Suck my fucking balls!
So far, everything I've said just comes down to a lack of structure and philosophical conflict, something the show absolutely nailed in its first 2 seasons. Season 1, for example, is built around a clear philosophical conflict of chaos versus control. Carmi believes that controlling chaos is the way to live. He's a world-class chef trained in hyper-organized kitchens, so when he steps into the messy, mismanaged world of the beef, belief-based conflict is immediately created.
Which is not how we have ever done a beef here in 25 years, Carl.
System, baby.
System.
You can barely afford to pay people, but system.
His efforts to impose order clash with a deeply chaotic system built on improvisation and habit. The kitchen becomes a metaphor for Carmi's mind as we follow his journey through the story circle. We start with a character in their zone of comfort. Carmi returns to Chicago and takes over his brother's struggling sandwich shop. But he wants something. He wants to fix the beef. In his mind, it's the closest he can get to a closure with Mikey, so he enters an unfamiliar situation by stepping into the chaotic world of a failing restaurant. Carmi introduces new systems, hires Sydney, and tries to instill discipline. And as he does this throughout the season, his beliefs are constantly challenged, forcing him to make difficult choices.
Carm, this place is bullshit, right? I mean, you're never gonna fix it. Look, let's just do the easy thing here, and you sell it to me.
No.
He gets what he wants when he starts to gain control of the kitchen and earns the crew's respect, but everything explodes in episode 7. Sydney and Marcus quit, Richie gets stabbed, and Carmi loses control completely. He then makes a choice to change. He reopens the restaurant, reaches out to Sydney, apologizes to Marcus, and finally confronts his repressed grief over Mikey. By the finale, he lets go of the beef and commits to opening the Bear, thus going full circle. The philosophical conflict of chaos versus control remains at the heart of Season 2. This time Carmi wants to open the bear and he wants it to be perfect. By the way, that desire isn't his alone, every major character shares it in some form. So when we get their individual episodes, they're each following the same core want, just within their own story circles. That's what keeps the narrative focused and stops it from feeling like a complete mess in later seasons. But without the routine of the kitchen, the one place where Carmi typically has complete control, the chaos of his personal life starts to spill out. Deadlines, construction issues, family tensions, and a newly formed relationship with Claire. To adapt, Carmi starts to share control. He delegates major responsibilities to Sydney and the team, and he tries to balance work with his personal life. But once again, his beliefs are constantly tested, forcing him to make difficult choices.
Carmen, you want to be the guy? Right?
Yeah.
Be the fucking guy. Right? So you gotta put your fucking head down, you gotta focus, and you gotta live this shit and nothing else. But if this is gonna work for you, you gotta give up every fucking minute, every drop of blood you have. You cannot take your eyes off this thing.
He gets what he wants when the restaurant finally opens, and for a brief moment he even finds happiness with Claire. But it comes at a cost. On opening night, Carmi gets locked in the walk-in freezer, spirals into self-blame and convinces himself that letting chaos in through love has ruined everything. He loses Claire, and by the end of the season he's right back where he started, alone and once again obsessed with total control. Unlike season 1, this time the change is negative. And if we zoom out and apply that same structure to the overall arc of the series, the season 2 finale actually lands on the 6th stage of the story circle. Pay a heavy price. So naturally, if the show were following through, season 3 should have been the return, a coming back to the familiar world, changed, a chance for Carmi and the others to apply what they've learned, rebuild relationships, confront their old patterns, and finish on a high note. Allegedly, that was the original plan, though to be fair, that's mostly speculation and I haven't found a solid source to confirm it. But narratively, it would have made perfect sense. In a standard 3-act structure, the character's lowest point usually lands at the end of Act 2 or beginning of Act 3, and that's exactly where we end up at the close of Season 2. Instead, what we got was basically one season stretched into 2.
When we went in to start season 3, we weren't going in to make season 3 and season 4,
Right.
but it swelled and some of our episodes got quite big and over an hour. And so some of these episodes were like splitting, you know.
Right.
I was like, you know what, we're going to actually turn this into 2 seasons. And now we're going to be making 15 or 16 episodes instead of 10, but we're going to do them all at the same time. I would come in the beginning of the day and work on a scene from late in season 4, and then shoot a scene from early in season 3, and then shoot a scene from late in season 3.
And that explains why so much of season 4 feels like a payoff with no setup or setup with no payoff. Some scenes are clearly wrapping up season 3 while others are laying the groundwork for later. That probably also explains why the structure feels so messy and why it is so difficult to map out a clean story circle for season 3 and 4 individually. So instead, let's treat them as one and see where they complete Carmi's overall arc. The philosophical conflict of chaos versus control is still at play. At the start of season 3, Carmi is back in his comfort zone, he's cut out the chaos entirely and buried himself in the kitchen. He wants to achieve excellence, so he enters what looks like an unfamiliar situation. To adapt, Carmi doubles down on control, he implements non-negotiables, changes the menu daily, and shuts out all the input from Richie and Sydney. He gets what he wants, or at least he thinks he does.
My life stopped.
That's the point, right?
That's the point?
You wanted to be great. You wanted to be excellent. So you got rid of all the bullshit and you concentrated and you got focused and you got great. You got excellent. It worked.
The perfect chef he strives to be is the same figure who haunts him, a symbol of trauma and emotional distance he's never escaped. And so he pays a heavy price. His complete obsession with control nearly bankrupts the restaurant, drives staff away, and fractures the most important relationships in the kitchen. Eventually, he begins to wake up, he apologizes to Claire, begins to repair his relationship with Richie and Sydney, steps back from total control, and even changes the partnership agreement. He finally sees that his fixation on perfection and control, on being the chef, path wasn't excellence, but delusion, a way to avoid grief, vulnerability, and real connection. So he decides to eventually leave the restaurant and confront the chaos of his personal life, something he's been avoiding for his entire life.
I think I have put a lot of stuff in the way, right? Of not dealing with other stuff.
And honestly, that sounds pretty solid when you look at it like this. It even nicely completes the larger story circle. The problem is that it is stretched across 20 episodes, and in between we get a bunch of unrelated detours and distractions that weaken the overall impact and completely break the 3-act structure, which, in my opinion, the show was clearly building toward in season 1 and 2. And it's not just Carmi's arc that suffers. The show's loss of structure sends several other characters off in a completely meaningless directions, with no philosophical conflict to anchor them. Take Sydney for example. She is borderline insufferable now, constantly stuck in a loop of indecision that leads absolutely nowhere. She spends an entire episode contemplating whether or not to join Shapiro's new restaurant, and by the end she still hasn't made a choice. Now compare that to something like Forks or Honeydew that completely transforms the characters throughout the episode. She's also been putting off reading the partnership agreement for basically 2 full seasons, and in the end she doesn't even get to make that choice herself. Pete just straight up tells her.
See, did you have a chance to look over the new agreement?
No. No, I haven't. I've been busy, and honestly, I do not understand it.
That's probably the definition of forced drama. It takes like 5 minutes at the very least to skim the important parts, and I don't know, it's just lazy writing. Her arc with her dad also completely lost its purpose. He used to be this force of opposition, someone who fueled her inner conflict of ambition versus self-doubt, and that is why their relationship was so interesting to follow. Now there is absolutely nothing there, and honestly I couldn't care less. Speaking of purposeless characters, Claire is in a very strange position this season. Originally, her entire function in season 2 was symbolic. She represented the life Carmi could have outside of the restaurant. And she wasn't just a love interest, she was this force of opposition that drove Carmi from control toward chaos. But that role only worked when we saw her entirely through Carmi's perspective. She wasn't really a character, she was a projection, sort of manic pixie dream girl shaped by Carmi's emotional needs. And that's okay, because it served a clear narrative purpose and added to the psychological conflict. Now in season 4, Claire is brought back, but without a defined function. She doesn't challenge Carmi anymore, she doesn't represent anything new, and because she was never a character to begin with, the relationship just doesn't hold much interest. Anyway, this season just wasn't fun to watch, and honestly it is disappointing that they haven't wrapped things up by now, because I genuinely don't see the reason season 4 needed to exist in this state, and I don't think they did either. That said, with season 5 officially confirmed, I really hope the show gets the strong final chapter it deserves. Otherwise, the bear is just one of those series people only recommend for the first 2 seasons, with everything after forgotten or dismissed. Well, I hope I made sense, and I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. Thanks.